One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.
Larry Lyons is the athletic director at Illinois State and is on One Question for the first time. Larry, there are a number of athletic director openings around the nation. We just learned about Alabama State this morning. Louisville may or may not end up open, but there are a number of others, right? There's Cal, there's Virginia, there's UTSA, there's Drake, there's Richmond. I think we're up to maybe 16 openings right now. Your ascendance to the athletic director chair at Illinois State was from an internal background. I mean, you'd been with the department a number of years when you were named AD in May of 2013. Some of the AD openings out there right now may end up with an individual who comes from the department. Southern Utah is one that comes to mind, and we'll see where that goes. But I'm curious, with that background, when you become an AD, what's the biggest challenge for an individual who's come up through the department and now is going to oversee a group of people that were previously their peers?
I think the biggest challenge is it's the first time you've been in the chair. I think most folks who were at the senior level in terms of their former jobs have been in an advisory role, and it's easy to be an advisor. It's harder to be the one sitting in the chair and making the decisions. And you know those people a lot better than if it's you're going into a situation where it's cold and you have to earn trust and those kinds of things. So I think there is a challenge because there is some familiarity. Obviously, there's certain advantages because there is familiarity at the same time.
Knowing that challenge that you mentioned, when you were named AD in May of 2013, were there specific strategies that you were cognizant to employ to kind of overcome that hurdle early on in your tenure?
The best thing that happened to me specific to my situation was 2 years before that, I had been named interim, and I was in the interim chair for 5 months. And that really helped from my perspective because there were some decisions that needed to be made, particularly for some personnel decisions back then. And I made them free of the potential repercussions or anything because I said, this is the interim making the decision and this guy is going away. So let's make good decisions in the best interest of the institution and the department. That really helped to go through some tough decisions as an interim. So when I stepped into the chair full time, I had the confidence to know that, you know what, I can make some hard calls on personnel, and I can make some of those difficult calls when you have those hard discussions with donors or folks on campus that there might be some issues. So I was fortunate to have the ability to be an interim for a while and have a little bit of a test drive. So I look at myself just a little bit differently in that way.
Once you became permanent AD, do you recall, or in reflection, is there a point when you kind of stop maybe second guessing yourself or over analyzing? I guess how do you avoid over analyzing any situation early on when you're a new AD?
Again, I point back to my interim role. The first 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I was incredibly hard on myself. It was, I was living and dying with every game and I was just grinding so hard. And one of my coaches said, would you stop trying to be somebody you're not and just be you? And it was like, that makes a lot of sense. You make your way in this business, and it's a difficult business at times, by what your core values are and the strengths of your personality. And when you realize that those things are what's going to carry you forward and get back to being you and being the person that you are, then it becomes a heck of a lot easier. When you're trying to be everybody else's person, it's impossible.
That's interesting. On the advantages front, walk me through the familiarity with the department, the familiarity you had with donors and key leaders on campus, and how that allows you to really springboard forward.
Well, all those fronts. I was the internal guy, so the nuts and bolts of budget and strengths and weaknesses from the revenue and expense perspective, I had that down, and that's the hardest thing I think an AD has to deal with when they come into a new situation, is understanding that whole internal culture and really where the budget is. So that was easy for me. I was already pretty well ingrained with the campus culture because of committees that I'd been on and relationships I had, particularly with the vice president for finance and planning, and some of those key folks across campus. That certainly helped. And then, the donors, at least they know who you are right off the bat. They have a relationship with you. At least some of them do. I can't say that I had relationships with everybody, but it's another level there too, because some really high-end donors who I may not have had access to in the past, who I was familiar with, now it takes the relationship to another level, and you have to develop that trust very, very quickly.
Your background lends itself well to this question. It's one I've always wanted to ask, and frankly, it's one I've always wanted to understand myself. For a new athletic director who maybe does not have a strong skill set in the business realm or financial management, give me like 3 to 5 really key questions they should be asking or researching in the process of understanding if they want an open AD chair. What are some metrics or some data points that you would say are paramount in understanding the financial condition of a department?
I think it depends what level they're going to. I mean, if they're going to an Illinois State level, which is, I think we're kind of in a sweet spot at Illinois State, but we can talk about that at another time. But yeah, I think it depends if you're going to a Power 5 or if you're going to whatever level, is to really understand where the revenue sources are coming from. And if you're in an institution that's a student fee supported institution, or if you're a big guy and you've got the multimedia rights, and you really need to understand where those dollars are coming from and what colors of money can be used for what things. Now, Illinois State, being a state agency, there's very specific things that different colors of money can be used for: student fees versus tuition versus dollars generated by the athletic department. That may not be the same issue at a Power 5 school where they're a corporation in and of themselves. So you really have to understand how those dollars work, how you can use them. And you really need to trust the people that are providing that information for you in your business office, or that senior associate AD, whoever that person is. I think that's paramount, because so many decisions are based on the finances. Another thing that's really important is the relationships on campus, and that's at the vice presidential level, or the cabinet level people, student affairs, finance and planning, provost office, because those are individuals that, when something that really unfortunate happens, those are the folks that you're going to rely on to help make decisions. Obviously, the president's office is one of those. So those are the first 2 things I think are important. And then you got to work the external side of the house. You have to learn who the important donors are, and those relationships are very, very important.
Do you find yourself still, when you are have idle time, or even when you're structuring your weekly schedule, that you still dig in pretty heavily to your own financials at Illinois State, or do you feel like you've handed that off in a manner that you're comfortable with, which allows you to focus elsewhere?
I was able to handle it off pretty easily, because the staff that reported to me back then is still there. And then it's been a matter of training the person that's taking over the internal side of the house to handle the budget side of it. And then, that's an ongoing process. That's you allow them to make decisions on their own, and if you don't necessarily if you disagree with them, then you sit down and talk through it. Well, here's why I would have made a decision that might have been differently. But you still have to allow people and empower people to make decisions so they learn and so they grow. But I was fortunate. The basic nuts and bolts on the internal side was being handled by very experienced people, and then there's a person in the role now that I trust, and he's learning that side of the house. He's really good at it, and that also helps the trust factor.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.